you got your Bible, you can go ahead and make your way to the Psalms. Going low tech tonight. I do not have any slides for you. Later on, I'm going to have some folks pass out a handout. We're going to do things with paper tonight. So you will want to get out a Bible and turn there maybe as well to the book of Psalms. When it's my turn to make dinner at our house, I have a few go-to recipes that I like to cook, and one of them has a secret ingredient that makes it work, I believe, as a dish, and I actually have it with me here tonight. I'm going to reveal my secret ingredient to you tonight. It's right here in this bottle here, and actually, well, maybe it'd be more fun if I asked you to guess what my secret ingredient is. I'm guessing you probably can't tell from where you're sitting, but you know, the spice bottle, it's kind of a yellowish green, seedy thing. Got a good guess down here. When I'm making pasta, tomato-based pasta, penne noodles, I like to do a little ground turkey in it. I put all of the regular things in. I get a little salt, a little oregano, a little bit of red pepper flakes, and then, as Cody has guessed down here, I have my favorite secret ingredient to add to it, and that is the fennel seed. Anybody ever use the fennel seed when you cook? You fans of the fennel seed? I think that the fennel seed is like the secret star of this pasta that I like to make at home. Makes it taste really good, in my opinion. But the funny thing about it is, like, if I were just to open up the top of this container full of fennel seeds and kind of breathe in the smell of it, I do not like that smell right there of the fennel seed. And it certainly, if I were to take this top off and just give myself a big old handful of fennel seeds and pop them into my mouth and eat fennel seeds, it would not be like, eating sunflower seeds at the baseball game. It would be, frankly, it would be awful. That taste would be just very unsettling, unsatisfying, not good at all. Because if you've ever had fennel seeds, or if you've ever just smelled them, I can show you afterward if you want, there is this bitterness to it. In fact, the thing that fennel seeds are most often compared to, if you've never had it, in terms of taste, is licorice. Anybody like licorice? Handful. Anybody hate licorice? More handfuls? I feel like it's one of those things that has just a very strong reaction to it because it has that so much, bitterness to it. And fennel seeds are like that too. They have this, this bitterness to them, and to eat them by themselves would just be very unsatisfying. But then when you mix them in just the right way, when you incorporate them into that pasta that I love to make, it really adds something good. There's this richness, this wholesomeness, this goodness that comes from the bitter little fennel seeds, in my opinion, when you find the right outlet for them. And tonight I want you to keep those fennel seeds in your mind as we get back into the Psalms this evening. So last time we were together, we were talking about the Psalms. In fact, we were doing something a little bit different last time, not just looking at one psalm, but instead, we were talking about questions in the Psalms. In fact, we looked at, or I, at least in study, looked at all of the questions in the Psalms. And we were kind of dividing them out into different kinds of questions you see in the Psalms. And you probably remember, if you were here last time, there are lots and lots and lots of questions in the Psalms. Anybody remember how many questions there are in the Psalms? I showed you a number up on the screen. I don't expect you to remember, but maybe you do. Anybody? 151 questions in the 150 Psalms. You get the gold star, Walter. Well done. 151 questions, a lot of questions in the Psalms. So tonight we're going to look at all of the statements in the Psalms. Now, I'm kidding. I'm not going to do that. We're going to keep talking about questions tonight. Because one of the things we noticed is that Of all the questions in the Psalms, there were like three kinds of questions that came up more than any other kind of question. There were the who questions, there were the why questions, and there were the when questions, which are really more like how long questions, because that's what they always say. How long, O Lord? How long? So you have those who questions, you have the when questions, and you have the why questions. And when we were looking at it sort of from the bird's eye view, we were able to draw a few takeaways from it. Like, for example, number one, your questions are not off limits to God, even when they start with hard words like why and when and how long, not off limits to God. And the second thing we took away was that the Psalms teach us to ask our questions from a position of trust, a position of praise. So we noticed all those times where it says who, and very often it's like, who is like you, Lord? It's not really asking the question, it's saying, who is like you, Lord? Offering praise to God. And because the Psalms know who, then they have the courage to bring all those whys and how longs and whens before the Lord. They're asked from a position of trust, even if they're really hard questions to wrestle with. So those were sort of our two big takeaways last time. I think we're getting somewhere if we start to really put those in our hearts. But I think that we can also go a little deeper than that too. In fact, I think we probably need to. Because questions like, why, Lord? And how long, O Lord? Are questions that need to be handled with care. In some ways, you might even, to return to our analogy earlier, questions like why and how long are kind of like fennel seeds in a way, meaning you mix them into our prayer life in the right way. You incorporate them in with these other ingredients to our prayer life, and they can bring something good in our relationship with God and strengthen our faith in God. Because it's a good thing when we're able to open up our hearts and really be honest with God. And what does 1 Peter 5 say? Cast all of your anxieties on him because he cares for you. God invites us to do that. It's good when we do. But at the same time, we may want to be careful that our prayer diet doesn't turn into one handful of fennel seeds after another. You know, Hebrews warns us, Hebrews chapter 12, about letting bitterness take root and grow in us. That is something we want to watch out for. Not letting bitterness grow in our hearts and in our faith. It's something to be avoided. And how we handle the hard-to-answer questions may play a big role in that. So tonight, I'd like to offer a recipe of sorts. In fact, this is where that handout's going to come in. I'm going to call on my handout passing out people. If you don't mind passing those out here. This is going to be our recipe for tonight. You can actually, there's a few blanks on this when you get one in your hands. You can help me fill out this recipe. It's a psalm. It's Psalm 13 if you also want to get a Bible out and look at it there as well. I'd like for you to think of this psalm as like a tried and true family recipe that's been passed down through the family of God's faithful children for years and years and years. And what this recipe is, it's a recipe for a kind of prayer that's called lament. Prayer of lament. So in your favorite cookbooks at home, those of you who like to cook, you're probably able to find all kinds of different recipes that for whatever you want to cook. There's the appetizer recipes, the entree recipes, the dessert recipes, the salty snacks, the meaty pastas like I love, the spicy salsas. And whatever the occasion is, you go to your cookbook and you can probably find a how-to for whatever it is that you need. Well, the Psalms as a prayer book are like that too. They teach us joyful prayers. They teach us prayers when we're anxious. There's prayers for when we gather together like this for the whole people of God to praise together. There's prayers for our private confession of sin to God. And on we can go, all different kinds of prayers, including the kind of prayer that's called a lament. Is that an extra? I'm going to take one of those too, if you have an extra. No? Oh, thank you, Cody. Including the type of prayer that's called lament. I forgot to give myself one of these handouts here, too. And prayers of lament are that kind of prayer that says things like, "How long, O Lord?" Or "Why, Lord?" They're prayers that sprinkle in the fennel seeds. They're prayers that deal with those notes of bitterness and those things that on their own are unsettling and unsatisfying and hard to swallow. But what I love about the Psalms of Lament is that they have this way of approaching the hard stuff, this sort of pattern you can detect if you really look at them, a sort of recipe in a way. And what I'd like to do is offer one of these to you tonight as sort of a practical help to us. For those times in our lives when we need to ask God, "Why, Lord?" Or those times when we want to say, "How long, Lord?" I offer this psalm as sort of a recipe to try out and practice yourself so that when it comes to those hard questions, they can be a benefit to us, a strengthener of our faith. So I'm guessing everybody's got a handout. Thank you, Starkses, for handing those out for us tonight. On it, the first page, we're focused on the first page now, is Psalm 13. This psalm is a short and simple version of the kind of psalm we're talking about tonight. It is a prayer of lament. And what I want to show you tonight is that prayers of lament are very often made up of 5 parts. Sure, not every one of them has all 5 parts, and not every one of them does them all in the same order. That's definitely true. But by and large, these prayers in your psalms very often have these 5 components to them, these 5 ingredients to them as they ask the hard questions of the heart. So let's follow along and read it together, and then we'll break it down into its parts. So the psalm says, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day long? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider me and answer me, O my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death. And my enemies will say, I have prevailed. My foes will rejoice because I'm shaken. But I trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me." It's a really beautiful psalm, a psalm of great honesty, a psalm that really pours out some hard questions, but it also, you probably can tell, has this sort of groundedness to it, this position of faith and trust to it as it asks these questions. And that comes, I believe, from the way that it puts these things together, this mixture of ingredients in this prayer. So what are these things that are these 5 ingredients in the prayer? If you want to write these in, you can. The first one, most people call the address. That's the stuff in red on your page. The red lines, the red blank up at the top. And basically what this means is this is the parts of the prayer where it addresses God. How long, O Lord my God. And so in one sense it's reminding us, and the prayer reminds the one who prays it of who we're talking to here. We're talking to the Lord, who is God. We don't forget who it is that we're talking to. But also it shows us that this is talking with God, not just some abstract thing. This is not a textbook, it's a prayer. It's addressing God. And when it does address God, it really pours out the things of the heart. That's the second thing. The one in orange is the tough stuff in the psalm. How long, O Lord? The second part is what people usually call the complaint. Or if that sounds too negative, although these are very often negative, you could put the cry of the psalm. And Psalms of a Lament have these. They cry out to God. So this is where David, in this case, gets the burden of his heart off of his chest. Lays it out there. This is how I'm feeling, Lord. This is what I'm going through. Let me be brutally honest about what's really going on. It's very raw. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? But the prayer doesn't just leave it at that, does it? Instead, it moves to part 3. The word for your blank there is the word petition. At first, David's saying how he's feeling. Now, he asks God to do something. Ask God to do something about it. In the words of Philippians chapter 4, David is really presenting his requests to God. That's what he's doing here. And so now the questions have changed to this. Consider and answer me. Give light to my eyes. He's asking God to do something. But again, that's not all. Because now the psalm turns to 2 more things, 2 very closely related things. In fact, it's kind of hard to decide where one ends and the other begins. So the final 2 ingredients to this psalm of lament are, number 4, confidence, and number 5, confession. Confidence and confession. And like I said, they're very closely related. But the confidence part is mostly about looking back and saying, this is why I know I can trust you, Lord. It's looking backwards and saying, this is why, these are my reasons. Things that I've seen you in action and I know. So, but I trusted in your steadfast love. He thinks back to times that God has dealt bountifully with me. And looking back on those things gives confidence. And so then he turns and confesses something for the present or for the future. This is what I will do because I trust in you. So my heart shall rejoice in your salvation right now and in the days to come, even with whatever's going on. That's making a resolve. I will sing to the Lord. Another resolve. So there's sort of a balance here, a relationship between expressing your troubles and remembering your trust, between asking God to do something and also resolving in yourself what you're going to do, how you're going to go forth from this moment. And these are sort of the 5 things that you very often find in psalms like this, psalms of lament. In that way, it's kind of a recipe for us. And I'm, of course, not saying this is the only way you can pray or that every time you pray you have to fill in these blanks or do it like in exactly this way. But what I am saying is that there's great wisdom in this psalm, I think, for dealing with the hard questions that we face. Because we want to be honest and able to share, bring it all to God. But we also know that prayer forms and shapes us too. Prayer is that great chance we have. It's like a practice ground for us to choose faith. It's a chance to practice choosing faith in our relationship with God. And so here we have this way to mix in the fennel seeds without being overcome by the bitterness. I like it because it's kind of practical and sort of a how-to thing that you could actually use in in your life. And so actually what I want you to do is flip to the second page of your handout. So imagine you have something you want to lift up to God, something on your heart. Could the way the psalm teaches us prayer, could it help you as you pray for what's on your heart? So I've given you two sides to this here. One's a blank side, and then one I've tried to give you an example. I chose something hard that brings up hard questions that's on a lot of people's hearts right now. We're thinking about our brothers and sisters in Ukraine and in Russia and those who are affected by the war going on. And then beside it, I left it blank so you could take this home, and if there's something on your mind, on your heart, you can kind of work through this if you want to as well. But let's look at the example. Maybe Psalm 13 can teach us something about praying for our friends in Ukraine. Maybe it includes the hard questions, like that second one there. How long will this continue in Ukraine? Why must faithful people flee for their lives or fear for their lives? How many lives must be lost? God allows us to ask hard questions to him. The hard questions of our heart. Maybe we also remember the kind of God we're talking to when we kind of think about it in this way. So we address him something like, God over all the earth, every nation and kingdom in the world, you are God over it. A God who makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. We can raise our petitions to God, bring the fighting to an end, protect the defenseless, strengthen the church. It could be big things, or it could be a petition for that person we pray for, that specific person we know who's affected by it. Keep them safe. Maybe we're prompted to take time and reflect on what God has done in the past. Like how wars have come and gone in this world, but God is still God. And he delivers us. Very often in this life, but most of all in the next. Maybe praying like this helps us not to forget to do some resolving in our lives too. I'm not going to take things for granted here, because I think about what our brothers and sisters are doing there and dealing with. Or I'll be still and know that you're God. I'll trust in you in a world that can be a hard world to be in. Maybe something like this can be practical for the way we address the hard questions of our faith. The whys and the hows and the how longs. God has shown us a faithful way to respond to those. Maybe we can use it. And in case you need an example of what that looks like when somebody uses it, this will be the last thing I show you tonight. In case you need a real life example, you can turn to page 3. We actually talked about this story on Sunday. John chapter 11, we talked about Martha. She had that remarkable faith. You remember Martha is the sister of Lazarus. And you know what happened to Lazarus? Lazarus gets sick. Martha calls on Jesus, help him out, and she waits. How long, oh Lord, am I going to have to wait on you to get here? And by the time Jesus gets here, Lazarus has died, and now Martha has these questions in her heart, like, why? Why didn't you help me out? Well, many people have pointed out that this great, honest faith that Martha has looks a whole lot like what she would have learned from the Psalms of lament. So we have the addressing of God, the addressing of Christ as her Lord. She's still calling him Lord, even though all of this has happened. She really believes he's the Lord, in spite of everything. And she really pours out her heart. Number 2, the cry or the complaint of the lament. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, she says. That's the burden of her heart. She lays it out there. But even now I know, she says. Hear that confidence? That confidence in God? Even now I know that your God will give you, that God will give you whatever you ask of him. This comes just a little bit short of a petition, but boy, she's really saying, I know that if you bring this to God, he'll do something. She wants Jesus to do something, even still. And then lastly, of course, there is her great confession of trust, that despite everything that she's been through and everything that she's seen, still she says, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who's coming into the world. Martha's faithful response is like what the Psalms, it's like what they teach us. She takes that recipe, that prayer recipe from the Psalms, she puts it into practice in her life. And because she does, she becomes that remarkable example that she is for us in our faith to follow. And maybe that's an example you need this week. In our lives, we face big questions, hard questions. I wonder if the example of the Psalms could be a place to start for you as you deal with those. Certainly, I would want to remind you, you don't have to do it alone. That's what your church family is for. It's what our ministers are for, our elders. Here to help you. Here to listen with you and ask the question with you. Maybe you can learn from a person like Martha who took something like those Psalms and internalized it into her faith and lived it in her life. Maybe that's the challenge that sticks with you tonight. Maybe we're reminded, as Martha was, that Jesus is the resurrection and the life. And that we can come to him for life. Perhaps somebody needs to do that tonight. We know we have people here as well as people who listen with us each time online. I want to remind you that the gospel's invitation is open to all to share in that life. However you might be called or challenged tonight, let's invite a response while we stand and while we sing.